Hello everyone, my name is Gay Rowley and I'm director of the Waseda University Library here in Tokyo. The library was founded in 1882 at the same time as the university and now encompasses 21 different facilities, from campus libraries to student and faculty reading rooms to here, the Central Library, which was inaugurated in 1991. One of the things I love most about the libraries at Waseda is that they're open stack. You can wander the aisles, look at the books and make unexpected discoveries. I still remember the thrill I felt when I first came down here to explore the research collections. Amazing. The combined total of Waseda's collection is approximately 5.8 million books, over 115,000 electronic journals and more than 200 databases. Among the Central Library's collections are about 300,000 valuable materials, including rare books, manuscripts and works of art. Some 90,000 of these rare books and manuscripts have been digitized and made available on our Kotenseki Sogo database, the Japanese and Chinese classics online database, where they can be searched, examined and downloaded without charge. We thought you might like to see some of the rare and valuable items in our collection. And thanks to the support of the Global Japanese Model Unit, Waseda University Top Global University Project, this is the first in what we hope will be a series of short videos. We'll start with two highlights from our extensive collection of editions of The Tale of Genji, Japan's greatest work of literature, completed about 1,000 years ago by a noblewoman who is known to us as Murasaki Shikibu. According to legend, Murasaki had been asked by her mistress, the imperial consort Fujiwara no Shoshi, for a new tale. She went to the temple at Ishiyama on the shores of Lake Biwa to pray for inspiration. That night, the moon of the 15th night of the 8th month was shining over the waters of the lake, and as Murasaki became absorbed in its beauty, the idea for the tale came to her. So here we see Murasaki Shikibu standing on the veranda of the temple at Ishiyama, looking out over the waters of Lake Biwa with the full moon of the 8th month high in the sky above her. It's the illustration for the cover of Yosano Akiko's translation of The Tale of Genji, published 1912-1913, and we'll be talking a bit more about this edition of Genji later in today's talk. Murasaki Shikibu's original manuscripts from 1,000 years ago do not survive. The text was passed from generation to generation by laboriously copying by hand. In the early 17th century, it was printed for the first time. Some of these printed editions only provided the text, some were illustrated, and some provided both the text and aids to reading, such as notes and commentary, but no illustrations. Here we see one of the most famous of, and certainly the most long-lived of those 17th century editions of The Tale of Genji. It's a 60-volume Genji Monogatari Kogetsu Sho, which was completed in 1673 by Kitamura Kigen. This copy once belonged to Professor Nakano Koichi, who taught at Waseda for many years. Professor Nakano remembered that when he was a student at Waseda in the 1960s, his own professor, Professor Oka Kazuo, lectured still in the 1960s from a copy of the Kogetsu Sho, more than 250 years after it was first published. So let's have a look and see what it's like. Okay, I've carefully selected volume number 8 from the 60 volumes. It's a chapter called Hana no En. You can see that the label on the cover here says Kogetsu Sho and then hana no en. It doesn't have a number, so you can't tell that it's chapter 8, and it was kept in a box like this, and you can see here that some later reader, for their own convenience, has occasionally written the name of a chapter on the edge here so they can see what chapter is where. It's a little bit grubby. You can tell that it's been read, but it's in amazingly good condition. So we open the cover and we turn to the first page, and in fact it's not the chapter. We have the chapter title here, and then we have a lengthy explanation of why the chapter is called that. And then we go over the page here, and finally the commentary comes to an end, and the chapter begins here. And you can see how there's a kind of frame in which the text and the head notes sit. And the text is, there are a number of interlinear notes here. Kisaragi no hatsuka amari, nanden no sakura no en sesase tamo. Further on the same page, Genji speaks. He says, haru toyu moji tama wa ready. And if you're reading the original, you don't know that Genji said that until you come to the quotative particle to, and then you realize, oh, somebody said something there. But the Kogetsusho has very helpfully added Genji nari. It's Genji who's speaking here. So you can see how helpful the Kogetsusho is in aiding readers to understand it. As I mentioned earlier, the Kogetsusho was used as a teaching text at Japanese universities well into the 1960s. But what about the general reading public? What were they going to read? By the turn of the 20th century, the language of the tale of Genji was already 900 years in the past. And there was a general feeling that some new version that was much more accessible to the ordinary and the greatly expanded reading public of the 20th century was needed. And that process of creating a new Genji that was accessible to the widely expanded reading public was something that Yosano Akiko achieved. What we have here is Akiko's Shin'yaku Genji Monogatari, literally a new translation of the tale of Genji, which was published in 4 volumes between 1912 and 1913. This first volume here contains the 21 chapters from Kiritsubo to Otome, and so you can see it's been radically abridged. What I'd like to do now is have a look at the same Hana no En chapter that we looked at in the Kogetsusho and compare them. First of all, you can see that the chapter begins with an illustration, a version of it here, and it's the famous scene where Genji grasps the sleeve of the young woman Oborodzuki, literally misty moon, that he meets in this chapter. So we begin with the picture, we turn over, and we have here the first sentence. 2月の21日に獅神殿の桜の縁が催された. And you can see here that as a translation, what Akiko has done has moved some of the notes in the Kogetsusho directly into the text. Instead of having notes, those notes are in the text. So instead of having nanden, for example, she's moved the explanatory shishinden directly into the text. You can also see here on the next page that there are distinct breaks made for people's speech. So when somebody speaks, a new line is begun, and there's a kakko, a little indication that this is spoken text. And that's another innovation that Akiko made in her translation that people found very helpful. By reducing the length of the tale and translating freely, Akiko rewrote Genji in the language of the modern Japanese novel. So the text is printed in standard movable type. There are no notes. The dialogue is clearly distinguished from the narrative by line breaks and the Japanese equivalent of quotation marks. So Akiko's was a version of Genji that was designed to be read from cover to cover. It was published in these 4 volumes, but in later years it was published in a single volume edition. So you really could have, it's long, obviously, but you could read it literally from cover to cover. You didn't have to take each volume out by itself and pore over it, looking at the commentary, reading the notes, and looking at the interlinear notes. Akiko and her publisher went to a lot of trouble to make the translation appeal to readers. They commissioned the artist Nakazawa Hiromitsu to design the covers of each volume. Remember, we looked at the cover earlier of Akiko's the first volume, which showed Murasaki Shikibu on the veranda at Ishiyama-dera. Nakazawa also created 57 gorgeous woodblock printed illustrations, one for each of the 54 chapters and an extra one for some of the longer chapters. So you can see that Hana no En comes to an end here, and the illustration for the very next chapter is there. It's the famous so-called Battle of the Carriages scene between the carriages in which the Rokujo lady and Genji's wife, Lady Aoi, go to have a look at the Kamo festival, and their underlings get into an awful fight. And you can see that scene illustrated here in Nakazawa's illustration. I hope that you've enjoyed this short introduction to 2 of our editions of The Tale of Genji here in the Waseda University Library. As you'll have seen, we have the resources here to support research in Japanese literature in a wide variety of different fields and periods, and of course, a host of other subjects as well. We encourage you to think about coming to Japan to study with us. For further details, have a look at our websites. We look forward to introducing another of our treasures in the next installment.